For today's podcast, I'm going to take a person that I write about in my book, The Unshakable Leader. And this is one of the original Stoics, because the book is about kind of Stoic approach to leadership. And the Stoic was Cato the Younger. And I think that what's interesting is that he has a great quote that I love where he says, "I would rather be right with no one than wrong with the whole world." And that's such a classic example of Stoicism. These are people that had their lives they lived their lives based on principles. He was the great grandson of Cato the Elder. That's why he's called Cato the Younger. And he basically had a heritage of principle. He kind of grew up in a family that was philosophers and cared a lot about right, wrong, values, all that stuff. But what's neat is that Stoicism and a belief system shaped his moral backbone. These days, that can be your faith, can be Christianity, which I believe in firmly. You can have, whatever form of faith that you like. You can have Stoicism. Again, I like to balance multiple, ways of leading and believing. But I care the most about having values that form the way I lead. Because I believe that leaders form their values before they lead. And leaders who don't have a much harder time. Cato was one of these, again, this is way back, thousands of years ago. But even in that day, he lived a very austere lifestyle, very simple, very plain, wore a very plain toga, walked barefoot, and just rejected pomp that he could have actually had because they had money. He believed that consistency breeds credibility. And I love that concept. I love the idea that if I'm consistent in doing things the right way, if I'm consistent in my values, if I'm consistent as a person, that builds credibility because people then know what to expect of me. And when my actions match my words, that's where I build trust. And what's so great is that Cato was this philosopher in action. He was a senator, and so he balanced his Senate duties with philosopher, type of duties. I don't know back then. But basically, he lived his philosophy, which is perfect, right? It's like, that with religion some days, there are people that speak religion, but don't live religion. And I always want to be a person who is consistent with how I act and the words that I use. And I think that when I have a situation in life where I am being consistent, then I know that I have, once again, greater virtue, greater credibility. He also fought in the Spartacus War, but refused honors, above standards. He shared his hardships with his soldiers, which obviously earns loyalty. And realistically, we see this all the time when we see leaders who are true servant leaders who don't act above other people. That's what Cato did. He was with his people, not above his people. And when you lead by example, man, nothing speaks louder. He also, again, was very rich, but didn't flaunt that. I think that's great is that one of the things with Cato is that he held his friends to a high standard when it came to values, principles, and trust. And that is something where, once again, we so often are defined by our 5 closest friends. And for me, in my life, I have really worked hard to try to have really good, close friends, really good friends who are close friends. And sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't. But I've known that, like with my family, man, that is one of the things that I can always depend on. And the more that I surround myself with people who I look up to, the more that I have people who have high morals, high standards, who are disciplined people, I know that I will be a better person because of it. It is an interesting thing when, you're in politics or leadership, whatever. Again, Cato was in politics as a senator. Sometimes your principles get pushed down. Sometimes you have the options to do something that's more gray than black and white. And one of the keys is we always need to work on trying to live by our principles, and when we don't, learning and growing from that, because once again, we're not perfect. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. We're all good with that. But are we learning? Are we growing? Are we always trying to be better? And I think that what's great is that, again, I know this one's about stoicism here, but there's this idea of stoic consistency, of embracing justice and courage and discipline as a daily practice. Like, are there things that you do every day? I can say that I exercise almost every single day, in some way, shape, or form. And I will take cold showers almost every day. And I oftentimes don't feel like exercising, and I still do. I definitely never feel like a cold shower, and I still do that. And the idea here is to live your values, to try to have integrity and live your integrity. Once again, not saying that, anyone needs to be perfect. But what I think is interesting is that when people like Cato lead, when he led, he believed in sharing power. And I think that there's greatness in that. When we don't abuse our power, when we are a true servant leader, where we are serving and giving and doing for others, not just expecting all of them to do for us, that is a key thing. And the more that you read about people like Cato, the more that you recognize different things in them that you can incorporate in yourself. And I think that what is interesting is that, again, stuff back in the, thousands of years ago may not fully apply to what we're doing today, but many of them do. Most leaders go through the same types of issues. And I think that what is key is, are you going to be a leader that other people look up to? I use the analogy very commonly that if someone was going to write a story about your life, like Cato the Younger has had stories written about his life. If someone was going to write the story or read the story about your life, would they be impressed? If people read my story, I love the idea of what's called the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is great because it's actually circular, but the idea of it is that there are ups and downs. And the whole idea is that when you get knocked down, a victim stays down and says, "Poor me." But a hero says, "Wow, that was bad. What am I supposed to learn from this? And how can I be stronger so I don't get knocked down again?" Cato was great about listening to the people who challenged him. And it was great because, again, he was very intellectual. He was very theoretical. He cared so much about this idea of how can we lead better? How can we lead in a way that helps us to create goodness and to create a better society? How can we lead in such a way that creates a better family, that creates a better home, that creates a better department or organization that you have? The idea that always learning from the people in our past, the people in our present, helps us to be better as people. And I love learning. I love reading. It is something where I hope that I do it till my last days. If we're going to learn anything from people like Cato the Younger, it is that our principles and our values are what will guide us the most. It is having a belief system, a faith that you use every day in action that will help you to live the life that you want to live. And I want to live that kind of life. I want to live a life where I am keeping my eyes wide open, that I'm seeing the good, the bad, and how I can serve other people. That's what we're supposed to do as leaders, right? That's what we're supposed to do as people. We're supposed to serve. We're supposed to give. We're supposed to care about our fellow human beings, our brothers and sisters out there. And so, what are you doing? What are you doing to serve, to give, to have impact? I hope that you can always grow and learn as a leader. I hope that you can always learn from people like Cato. I hope that we can all strive to make this world, our world, a better place. Because if we're not going to do it, who will? So if you ever want any help, again, I'm happy to do one-on-one coaching with you, group coaching with you. I've got a great leadership program called Learn, Grow, Lead. It's 6 sessions long. And in any way that I might be able to serve you, please let me know. You can access all the information on the website. And I hope to be able to talk to you at some point. Thanks and take care.